Good lunch. Good party. Okay. So, welcome to the afternoon session, the first day of our conference. The conference was entitled The Science and Alchemy of Consciousness. And I thought maybe this might be a good time to figure out why the word alchemy was included in the science of consciousness. And we start with a simple question. I suppose most of us know why it is that if an ice skater is spinning with their arms out and they slowly pull their arms in, they speed up, right? What's that principle called in science? Anybody know?
Preservation of angular momentum.
Thank you. Conservation of angular momentum. Exactly. We have a scientist here. Look out. He's coming up fast. Wonderful. Yes. Now, when the original work was done with the Ark of the Covenant, they used a spark gap between the gold points here to stabilize the monoatom of gold into the monoatomic state, the manna from heaven, the origin of Holy Communion. And when that was analyzed earlier by David Hudson, that was called a high spin state. So now somebody's pulling in their arms and they're going into a high spin state. Is that a clue to the nature of alchemy? And why is it there's a particular electric field, hint, it might be called fractal, which enables a gold atom to suddenly be stable as a monoatom, and thus edible, soluble, accessible. So the edible gold, the manna from heaven that they found in the desert, was a high spin state because the spin density increases during that alchemic process, meaning charge collapse. Let me just sit here for a second. So actually, as this slide explains, there was a particular kind of a shaggy algae. We're having shades of Professor Ralph Otterpole here, but there was a particular kind of shaggy algae which they used to eat, to consume the monoatomic gold, and that solubility with that particular shaggy algae produced what they called show bread. They were literally making bread. The manna from heaven was bread, and why did they have to bake that bread? They were baking their bread, yes, because that shaggy algae had a side byproduct. It was a sulfur, and they had to bake that off before the manna from heaven, the bread from heaven, would taste good. So that shaggy algae was doing a particular service there, which had to do with rendering solubility, which the passage through the metabolism of the algae enabled the solubility. And when gold is soluble in blood, you have magic because you have implosion. Actually, the particular term for what you have is alchemy. Now the term alchem, actually originally, people say it came from Egypt. I'm sure you've heard the story. That chem originally was the original name for Egypt, the land of the blue-black soil, the black soil. But also it meant the land of the blue-black pharaoh, actually, because the original Nubian pharaoh was a black pharaoh. They were the black pharaohs. And so there's many meanings to chem as the word for Egypt. But the word for chem that we're looking for, alchemy, has to do with access to a black hole. And we think that may be one of the highest definitions of the word for alchemy, that if you create that spin state and the right geometry of charge collapse, you create a centripetal, literally a black hole, alchem. And that process of that black hole making has to do with our first slide here. So here is, we're going to do this one first. Moment. Yeah. So here is a black hole. Now, if you stabilize the gold atom as a stack of platonic solids which are embedded, let's see if we have that here. We have self-similarity. Yes. Okay. So in the geometric origin of the atomic table, we start with a stack of electron shells there to your left. And the stack of electron shells is modeled here. Maybe you can see my cursor. So the electron shells here, this is the s suborbital, it's literally a torus, a spike, and this is the pi suborbital, literally a tetracube, 6 electrons, cubic, obviously. And the dodecaecosa geometry of the d and f suborbitals, 5, 7 electron pair, 10, 14 total electrons, means I got a donut on the inside, then I got a tetracube, and then I got a dodecaecosa, and that's the SPDF subshells of the electrons of the atomic table. And I'm finished doing the atomic table, and the only thing I've done is stacked these one inside the other, enabling charge collapse. And the nobility of gold is specifically the fact that all of those electron shells are filled and noble and stable, and they're not hungry for anything. They don't have to bond to anything because the stack is complete. The array is complete and fractal. There's no electron holes. There's nothing missing. The nobility of gold. So the reason this has such implications for alchemy is then a thin film of gold, and the thin film helps make the electric fields accessible to biology. The Chinese are famous for putting a thin film of gold on their cake, and it's wonderful. They eat it. They love it. Yeah, it's true. And gold in the right thin film state has a profound influence on the blood because it's a phase conjugator. As a monoatom, it's implosive, it's alchemic, it's centripetal. And the nature of the black hole at the center, well, first, while this slide is up, just notice that not only are the electrons of the atomic table a stack of platonic solids, but on the right here, which maybe you can't see very well, but the table of all the hadrons, the neutrons and protons of the entire atomic table of the nucleus is simply a nest of tetra, cube, octa, and ecosa. So you stack the neutrons and protons to make the nucleus of everything in the atomic table, and the only thing you have to do is put a tetra in a cube, in an octa, in an ecosa. That's Moon's famous work. And this is the entire atomic table, the nuclear geometries, a simple stack of nested platonics. The nucleus and the electrons, a simple charge collapsing alchemic implosive stack of embedded platonics, because the only way you can get a tetracube embedded in a dodecaecosa is golden ratio. And the only way you can embed a stellating dodecaecosa infinitely, obviously, is golden ratio. And that's the point here, is that's what enables charge collapse, and therefore implosion, therefore alchemy, therefore access to a black hole. Now, we've all kind of talked about this here. That black hole is right here. The red circle in the cascade of golden ratio harmonics, the red circle is the Planck dimension, and the red circle is specifically the embedding into longitudinal array, the coherence of the distribution of coherent longitudinal electromagnetics. Remember, coherent longitudinal EMF is the correct engineering term for what has been called scalar or torsional. And it's the part of the electromagnetic wave which propagates compressionally like this, and not transverse or up or down. And that compressional component is the physics of not just gravity waves, but the physics of ancestor memory and DNA radio, because only that transverse compressional component we call longitudinal bounces interactively at the nodes of the fractal array, the dodecaecosa Earth grid being a primary example. Only military quality telepathy only happens at the nodes of that array. That's been measured. And reduced nuclear critical mass has also been measured happening at the nodes. Now, when Bruce Cathy first measured that you get reduced nuclear critical mass at the Earth grid sacred sites, they didn't have a clue why. But now that you've listened to me for a minute, you know why, right? No?
Well, we can repeat it. Reduced mass?
Reduced nuclear critical mass. In other words, the amount of nuclear energy, the amount of gamma ray radiation, for example, it would take to make a nuclear atom go critical, nuclear critical mass it's called, is reduced. In other words, there's more compression at that node in the array. And the compression is actually literally the implosion geometry of the shape of the first nuclear device on the planet. It was a dodecaecosa, actually. The first nuclear device on this planet was a dodecaecosa, and that was an implosion device. They named it implosion, and that's how they made nuclear critical mass originally. It was successful compression, alchemic compression. So the point is that the information at the nodes of this longitudinal array, sometimes called sacred sites, is distributed by the compression is bouncing from the centripetal nodes of the sacred sites like a perfect echo in a Sufi movie. and only at the compressional nodes of that sacred grid of the earth, the sacred sites, is the longitudinal energy, inertia, exchanging charge with the transverse energy. So that longitudinal wave will go through anything, a Faraday cage, and it goes faster than light. Scientists don't know how to hold it down. Actually, longitudinal electromagnetics are very magical stuff, torsional, scalar. Whereas the transverse component is what makes up all of our radio and all of our, and we'll show some more animations of that. The point is that when you embed in that longitudinal array by achieving compression at the central node, Planck, the doorway, the gateway into that array. That is the reason Planck is the same for 1,000,000 light years in every direction. Planck is the same. It's not because of the Big Bang. Wrong. The reason Planck is the same for as far as we know in every direction is because the waves have to agree or die. Sort of sounds like people, doesn't it? So the principle is actually that only that perfected agreement is achieved by the discipline of the fractal array of Planck. And later when we see the measurements proving that that longitudinal wave, what the aboriginals called songline, dreaming track, the stuff, literally the stuff of lucid dream, literally the proven stuff of what gravity waves are made of, literally the proven stuff of clairvoyance, literally the proven media of lucid dreaming. It is that coherent longitudinal array. And the compression that gets you there is this fractal phase conjugate alchemic compression. So the first slide, so at least we have some sense of why we call this the science and alchemy of consciousness. Imagine, here's the simple classic visualization. You all know the story that you get golden ratio in your brain waves and you get bliss. That's called flameinmind.com, right? Well, those golden ratio alpha beta harmonics in your brainwaves are literally like fingers enabling you to squeeze a vortex that's forming in the synaptic array inside your head. So you inhabit an array now, for sure. It's called your synapses. That's called an array. And you inhabit that array. You're alive because those spark gaps enable that plasma vortex to be centripetal only in that array. Now, when you lucid dream or die successfully, the measurement of whether you have a soul, the trick is to unpack yourself from embedding in that smaller array and embed in a larger array. It's the same physics. So you got this vortex. You know, everybody who pretends, like these people who pretend to be talking about the physics of consciousness, if they don't have a clue where you go when you're outside your body, they haven't told you what the physics of consciousness is. Don't let Stuart Hameroff and microtubules, any of those people, pretend to tell you what the physics of consciousness is if they can't tell you where these dozens of medical surgeons were when they were documented to be outside their body during near-death experience, for example. The medical surgeons is famous. They had a near-death experience and they were outside their body for like 20 minutes. And they even remember where they were looking at their body from outside their body. And by the way, you cannot do it from inside an aluminum box. Hell no. But since millions of people have documented being out of their body, so if somebody says what the physics of consciousness is and doesn't tell you what the physics of consciousness is while you're outside your body, then they haven't told you what the physics of consciousness is. The physics of consciousness is this vortex inside your head that gets squeezed by those alpha beta brainwave harmonics to a point, to a compression point, to a longitudinal node of coherence, where longitudinal coherence radiates the stuff of lucid dreaming, the stuff of clairvoyance. So the alpha, beta, gamma harmonics in your brainwaves are the fingers that are taking you, allowing you to grab a hold of and squeeze a superfluid charged vortex inside your head and bring that vortex to a point. That is exactly what Iris is going to be talking about when she talks about kids seeing without their eyes and achieving clairvoyance and seeing their ancestors when they get golden ratio in their brainwaves. So that vortex liquid inside your head, if you squeeze it and it starts imploding, non-destructive charge collapse, Planck fire, becomes centripetal. And that donut will then tighten to a sharper point. That sharper point will then embed in the longitudinal array. And now those same kids that started seeing without their eyes start seeing their dead grandmothers, and their parents all freak out. So that longitudinal coherence is the stuff of the array. And it's the implosion that allows you to do it. So the outline slide, actually, for this talk is right here. This is the slide which I prepared to be the outline of this talk. That is, gaining energy during charge collapse, planckfire.com, is the electrical reason gravity exists. It's the electrical reason objects fall to the ground. Gaining energy during fractal charge collapse is the electrical reason perception and bliss form in the brain. Gaining energy during charge collapse, fractal conjugate, is the electrical reason seeds germinate and life force exists. It is the electrical reason pyramids and obelisks make global wireless power. It is the electrical reason zero-point energy, all vacuum energy, exists. It is the electrical reason golden ratio is the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. That's a smoking gun. Ask your physics teacher, why is golden ratio the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics? If they don't know, tell them, well, figure out why an object falls to the ground before you call yourself a physics teacher, actually. And so it is the electrical reason electron shells and the nuclear hadrons are platonic nests. It is the electrical reason all action at a distance exists. What physics calls entanglement, hooking up the wormholes, is a lousy word for phase conjugation, which is the climax form of entanglement. It is embedding perfected by definition. And what physics doesn't know is that the action at a distance is longitudinal coherence. You know, like when your guru bilocates. Teach him the physics, okay? So the ability to have action at a distance is actually rather simple, because if I had a transmitter here and a transmitter here, and they're both pumping out a longitudinal wave, and if I cross those longitudinal waves accurately at a distance at a right angle or a phase conjugate opposite, I could create a node at a distance where I could contain heat at a distance. This is the holy grail of all fusion energy research, ability to contain heat at a distance. Well, hello, coherent longitudinal interferometry is the answer to the holy grail of all fusion research, how to contain heat at a distance. Your microwave length determines the geometry of the node by which you contain heat at a distance. Oh, by the way, that's how bilocation works. That's how teleports, that's how stargates work, is that same implosion, because here's the two longitudinal microwaves coming and they meet at a distance. On their way to the meeting point, they will pass through anything. Steel boxes, Faraday cages, doesn't matter. Those longitudinal waves, man, they're like ancestor memories. They get around. In fact, they are ancestor memories, actually, quite literally. And where those longitudinal waves then cross at a distance, they then converge and resynthesize the transverse component only at the remote node, the mechanism of heat transfer. So all action at a distance, which is the essence of every spiritual story, is basically action at a distance, isn't it? So if your body could radiate coherent longitudinal, and that's the climax of today's talk and the beginning of tomorrow's talk, is that ability to radiate coherent longitudinal or scalar or torsional electromagnetic coherently and hopefully directionally. That ability is called having a soul. Okay, we have a website that already has like 25 documentary films, physicsofsoul.com, and that's what we're about to introduce here, is the ability to radiate that coherence. We're going to play the films of that. In fact, maybe we'll do that next. So here is recursive braiding in DNA. Now, if you take a phase conjugate pump wave, which is the brain wave and EKG harmonics of bliss. Take those long waves, we've measured them, they're mostly under 20 hertz, they're long waves. You take that phase conjugate caduceus-shaped pump wave called the heart in bliss and the brain waves of bliss, golden ratio, the exact same frequencies as Schumann, cascade, and the exact same frequencies Planck-Faraday, the perfect phase conjugate pump wave. And if you pump that into DNA, those long wave phonons trigger, and we've measured, and you'll see it all over this site. This is goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So basically, you feed the coherent harmonics of bliss in the heart and bliss in the brain, and we've measured this now, Glenn Ryan, to be acknowledged. And this triggers the recursive braiding where the plot thickens and the thread braids into string, and the string braids into rope, and the rope braids into fat rope. And the ratio of the long wave to the short wave, thread to string to rope to fat rope, 7 times. 7 arrows. I think it's the 7th seal from the Bible. Ooh. So the 7th time you recursively braid the DNA, it gets so thick the DNA becomes toroidal. We have the photomicrographs from biophysics, okay? The DNA implodes, turns inside out, and radiates coherent longitudinal EMF. The same reason that Iris's kids, when they make golden ratio in their brainwaves, they start seeing without their eyes, access to the longitudinal array, and they start having the clairvoyance, where they see their ancestors, access to the longitudinal array. So what happens during that recursive squeezing process, it's like you took a rope and you squeeze the rope, right? The water would come out if the rope was wet. Well, if it's an electromagnetic field, the most coherent part of the electromagnetic field comes out the fractal center of that cascade alchemically. That literally at the center of the imploding DNA, and it is literally toroidal, there's a coherent longitudinal EMF component. And this is an introduction to what you might need to do if you would like to lucid dream. And the lecture coming up on that subject, Anna? Okay, so the planning, remember, if you can lucid dream, it is pretty well documented that you will take memory through death. And what more powerful evidence could there be of what it is to have a soul than taking memory through death, right? I mean, isn't that the obvious definition of soul, taking memory through death, you know? I mean, it's like a 5-year-old would explain that. So the physics of what enables you to take memory through death, the coherent longitudinal radiance of the body that propagates into the lucid dream. And remember, these sacred sites were called dreaming track by the Aboriginals. Is that a clue? The song line, right? And that implosion to inhabit that lucid dream requires preparation. So as we have these conversations, it's very important that we ask questions like, well, how did this theory enable us to do it? Well, I can tell you. This theory that DNA needs this symmetric compression to lucid dream, the physics of bliss, the physics of sacred sites, the physics of charge-dense food, the physics of sacred dance and yoga, all of these are the processes enabling DNA to implode. Now, the opposite of that would be steel and aluminum buildings, electrosmog, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, everything that scrambles the electric field and prevents implosive compression. In exactly the same way that if you yank out the poisonous pink fluorescent lights in your kid's classroom and you install sunlight, John Ott proved you will measure a dramatic increase in attention span. The teacher in your child's school needs to know what attention is. The reason sunlight makes attention and the wrong fluorescent lights destroy attention measurably is because attention is made when compression is successful. And the harmonics in the sunlight are phase conjugate implosive hydrogen, you know, the whole good stuff. And so they allow that braiding implosion. Whereas the frequencies in that horrible fluorescent pink light and most artificial light. Now there's some lighting that causes seeds to grow. They call it grow lights for plants. They get a little better and they do make attention better. And there's what they call artist lighting, which emulates sunlight better. So there's various forms of lighting which are less destructive to attention. But one of the most destructive lighting to attention is mercury vapor lights. It's absolutely poison to all life force. And what's the first thing they install in most new big health food stores? Mercury vapor lights. Oh shit. But the point is they don't know what life force is, and they don't know what attention is. Attention is the implosion that results from successful alchemic fractal compression. So this was our introduction. So the idea of this little conversation here was to go down this list and say, okay, we said fractal conjugate charge collapse, PlanckFire.com, is the reason objects fall to the ground. Could you explain that to your 5-year-old? Okay, let's show your 5-year-old a picture. Here's a picture. Here is the top-down view of hydrogen right here, okay? It's 10 spirals of the golden mean. I wrote the equation to prove it. So the three primary hydrogen radii are doing exactly that, okay? So they make this picture of spirals imploding to a center. And when these spirals cross each other and implode to a center, every time the golden spiral crosses itself recursively, constructively, the waves add and multiply. They're called heterodynes, recursively, constructively. And they add and multiply recursively, constructively, only perfected by golden ratio, not just their wavelength, but their phase velocity. I've said this many times, but it bears repeating. So a portion of the electrical inertia of golden ratio compression, a portion of the electrical inertia of golden ratio compression propels the phase velocities, the wavefront speed, to recursively add and multiply constructively. And that generation of acceleration of charge towards center, only enabled by golden ratio, is how gravity is created. Gravity is only a name for the fact that charge accelerates towards center in a fractal. That charge acceleration towards center is the only definition of gravity. Do you see? So if you can invent a geometry of compression that turns compression into acceleration towards center, you now know what Einstein didn't, which is why objects fall to the ground. You're generating acceleration of charge towards center. This is the problem with modern physics. Modern physics does not seem to know why anything is centripetal. Life force is centripetal. Brain waves are implosive centripetal. Focused human attention causes charge to implode, collapse, been measured 100 times, Bill Tiller. Gravity is centripetal. Life force is centripetal. Consciousness is centripetal. But does physics know why anything is centripetal? Oh shit, I think physics needs some work here. Otherwise we can't create the centripetal force that creates consciousness, life, or gravity. And we can make gravity, we can stabilize gravity, and therefore atmosphere, practically, if we understood. So, you look at the top of that flower, and you tell me why objects fall to the ground, okay? So the waves of charge form a golden ratio, dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics, and then a portion of the energy of that compression creates charge acceleration toward the center. And when charge accelerates toward center, that's called gravity. Now you know why objects fall to the ground, and I would like you to explain it to your 5-year-olds, please. Okay? And then your 5-year-old can go to their PhD physics teacher, because they don't know. Okay? But so that's the very basic fundamental idea of PlanckFire.com. I took Planck length and time multiplied by integer exponents of golden mean ratio, fractality and conjugation perfected, and I create that charge implosion. The point is that when you think of that as charge collapse perfected, it was already actually agreed in physics. Most physicists already agree that charge collapse is the cause of gravity. And most physicists already agree that charge collapse is the cause of consciousness. This is not new information. The new information is what causes charge collapse. That's what they didn't figure out. That's the question I answered with PlanckFire.com. They already agreed charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. Old news. Now tell them what causes charge collapse, then they'll know what causes consciousness and what causes gravity. So PlanckFire.com answers that question because the black hole, alchemic, at the center of Planck fire implosion creates a way out for charge at the centripetal center of the vortex. Imagine Einstein a little bit puzzled because he hasn't yet figured out why objects do fall to the ground, and he says, gravity is infinite non-destructive charge collapse. That's Einstein. His problem was, where does the charge go at the center? That was his problem. That's what we have specifically answered right here. The charge finds a distribution point into the longitudinal array when it reaches the threshold of Planck and creates now what we now know is the definition of gravity waves. Longitudinal electromagnetics per Tom Beard. Anyway, so this is kind of a background. So let's see where we are on our main slides. Why objects fall to the ground. The historical reason perception and bliss form in the brain synaptic array. Actually, phase conjugate models of perception are very common. Fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. The basic idea is, this is me actually. I made those 5 golden ratio harmonics in my brain waves. What's interesting is I can do this almost on command. When I put the brainwave sensor on and kind of relax and feel the bliss, I can make this most, we might test me later, whatever. But, and I get a bliss feeling. It's very cool because I had, 30 years of Kundalini. But what I cannot do very often, or I don't do it much, I can't. I haven't yet, let me put it that, I haven't yet, is make the next step up the ladder, which is the 43 hertz gamma frequencies. I haven't made the gamma. And we know by measurement, the kids who get clairvoyance, we know by measurement the people that make stargates in remote view, they make gamma. So I know exactly what my next step is. And Patrick and I are working on this. More cues to help teach making gamma, actually. That high frequency. Because see, here's my, delta is high. Here's my delta. I have big peaks in delta. Big peaks in delta lower than alpha means you can hear the ancestors. That's actually what it means. It means you can hear the ancestors. And on my good days, I can actually often hear ancestors. I have some clairaudience.
And the rocks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. If the rocks are, sacred, exactly. Thank you. Yes. So, I have some clairaudience and not much clairvoyance, but quite a bit of clairaudience because my mother was a music teacher and I'm audio dominant. It's an old story. But the gamma, you see, what the high frequency does when you assemble these fingers, these are the fingers in your brainwave squeezing the vortex to make it come to a point called consciousness, called bliss. To make that implosion happen, you evolve the point, and this is why Iris is so cool. She's teaching the kids how to relax and have the bliss, and then they get the clairvoyance and the seeing without their eyes. So, but because I don't make much gamma, the high frequency is not present in my vortex cascade, which means, actually, that the shortest wavelength isn't there. The fingers, here's the low frequencies up top, and the short waves, gamma, is on the bottom. So I don't have the little finger closest to the point working. Oops. So I'm not finishing the squeezing process very well because I ain't making my 40 hertz gamma. That Tibetan, that's originally called Tibetan gamma. Even Michael Salla is talking about, we got to teach these people to make gamma because then they'll make stargates and they will teleport. And they do. We measured John Charles Moyen. That's another story. So the harmonics in the brain waves are your fingers to squeeze a vortex. It's simple. You get those harmonics coherent and powerful, and you can implode. And then even the Dracos know that you can measure electrically how powerful your consciousness is by how much it creates a squeezing. If you have a mind meld with an Orion Queen Mog, it feels like a vice-like grip, right? That's literally the implosion of mind. And they have that power. They got other problems. We might as well say, loss of soul, loss of long-term memory. Why is loss of soul related to loss of long-term memory? So that's some of the conversation we're going to do in the next lecture, where physics of soul and extraterrestrial history come in. So a subtitle of my second lecture tomorrow will be, why is it that the physics of soul is the turning point in the extraterrestrial history of Earth? The physics of soul is the turning point in the ET history of Earth. That's why it's so critical that if we allow our children to be robbed of their soul now by dumping this shitty steel building, electrosmog, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth crap and scrambling their DNA all to hell, no soul, no lucid dreaming, this is the loss, not just the souls of a billion kids, it is the loss of the galaxy war. Yes, it is the turning point of the galaxy. Which culture can make us? Everything else is minor. When the Dracos and the Greys were abducting, why did they take only the lucid dreamers? Some indigenous blood. Those were grounded. They had inhabited the same magnetic line for years, and they knew which DNA had leverage on the grid, and that is the body polis. Body polis is named for a bliss cocoon, how a beehive navigates with only royal blood, royal jelly present. The navigator is the royal blood, right? Well, the name for that is body polis, which is literally the bliss cocoon. Now, if we understand what that means biology, we have now just for the first time defined the word politics. Oh yeah. We have defined politics biologically, absolutely. Look, if enough people have a bliss process together, not only can they navigate a lucid dream together, they can navigate stars together. Do they need a government? Hell no. That is the biologic definition of government. So why is collective bliss illegal in most every country on the planet? Because every country on the planet knows that real collective bliss for people means the government is now not needed. It is literally biologic navigation. That collective bliss, the body polis, the definition of bliss. Meaning, now that we know, as the Aboriginal said, if you can teach your kids how to have bliss, you have culture. If you do not have the skill to teach your kids to have a bliss experience, you definitely have no culture. The Aboriginals knew, and they were right. Because when the young people have access to a bliss experience, they can get an immune system. They can lucid dream. They can have a soul. Bliss is literally the harmonic inclusiveness and heart rate variability, which is the fastest way medicine can measure immune health. Harmonic inclusive HRV, heart rate variability, Irving Dardick, is the fastest way medicine can measure immune health. Guess what human bliss is? Maximum of harmonic inclusiveness. What solves the geometry of harmonic inclusiveness? Constructive interference, fractality, golden ratio, obviously. So all of this leads us to the same conclusion that the coherent charge radiance, we're calling it access to bliss, but the Tibetans called it rainbow light body. We now teach the physics of why when Tibetan saints die, rainbows appear. It's well documented. The death process is electrically centripetal enough if you know why rainbows exist, and you should. I'll give you a hint. Photosynthesis frequencies are exactly phase conjugate, right? So rainbows exist because of phase conjugation, literally. So obviously, if a saint dies and adds centripetal force to the atmosphere, why do the rainbows show up? So the Tibetans called it rainbow light body. Gurdjieff called it the Kesjan body. The Egyptians called it the Ba from the Ka, where the Ka is the transverse EMF, and the Ba, the soul, is the longitudinal component. So this is the radiance into the longitudinal array that defines soul, and we want to go into that more maybe tomorrow and sort of politics. So next slide, next point here. The electric reason seeds germinate. The electric reason why seeds germinate. You know that book, Seeds of Knowledge, that figured out that all the sacred dolmen and stone circles, they didn't use them to live in or even, no, that one of the primary reasons they built those stone circles was to charge their seeds. Very well documented. To literally cause their seeds to germinate by charge implosion. This is the reason most of our sacred stone sites exist. Well, you know, and we have here, I have one slide I prepared for examples of this. So here is Therapy dramatically affecting seed germination. Okay, I got a phase conjugate centripetal field, and the growth effects in Tennessee. They said the flower shop across the street, all their roses started lasting twice as long.
Yeah.
I mean, these are real stories.
Nashville.
Yeah, in Nashville, yeah.
Yep.
So why did the roses last twice as long across the street from the Therapy? Hello. So it's really quite simple because if you're a seed, it's charge implosion. Yeah. The Therapy is simply a centripetal, broad spectral phase conjugate field, all the way from optical to RF to infrasound. That's what it is. It's a big pine cone kissing noses. And if you're a seed and you're about to germinate, the first thing you must do is really suck. I really suck some days, but no, but it's actually literally true. The ability to attract the first nutrient to that seed is electrical suction. Literally. This is this is life or death electrically for a seed. Can you suck? And so what makes a seed really suck? It's the centripetal force of charge implosion. The reason most original sacred stone sites were actually made to zap the seed. This is just one of many examples. And so here we're measuring the life force. This is from Patrick Botti. Here we measured 53 hertz, which is almost golden ratio times Planck, in a whole cascade here. And we showed the Schumann cascade in most of the sacred sites on Earth. And in this case, the measurement was made at the Sam's Bosnian Pyramid, where 1 million people a year come and get rejuvenation. 1 million people a year come there and they get rejuvenated. It's documented. This is old news. The new information is why, how. Here is a measurement of the harmonic content of those pyramids, the Visico-Bosnian pyramid, 53 hertz. And here is that cascade, okay? This is the Schumann harmonics in golden ratio. And so on Earth, the theoretical correct Schumann for Earth would be 7.29 hertz. That's Planck fire, golden ratio is Planck. But on Earth, the actual Schumann is 7.83. I think that Thoth Hermes' team may have spent 1 million years planning so that Earth's Schumann harmonic cascade would be a perfect phase conjugate pump wave. This is not an accident. Never. I think they planned that for at least 1 million years, myself. Okay? So the fact that the Schumann cascade here in green and Planck fire, Planck times golden ratio, is so close. And so what we did recently, we tweaked the harmonic output of flameandmind.com to fire, piezo fire, plasma fire, and pretty soon fire crystal. We tweaked it from the 7.29 theoretical to the 7.93 actual, and took that ratio up to the cascade. So the theoretical would be 50 hertz, but all over the world, we're measuring 53 hertz. Why? Because the actual Schumann on this planet is not quite Planck fire. It's very close. So if you modulate the Planck fire frequencies to be exactly Schumann, the healing effect in piezo fire, Planck fire, plasma fire is greater, it's faster. And Patrick's team, they actually have a team of sensitive people and they test these things regularly. So that's why we have 3 output harmonic cascades options at flameandmind.com, Flame and Sound. The drivers for our technologies, piezo fire, plasma fire. So basically, it's all about doing that charge collapse. So this is the background for this slide, which is, now you understand the electrical reason seeds germinate is charge collapse. Do you see why? Okay? And the reason, electrical reason for soul and bliss, we just discussed that. The electric reason pyramids and obelisks make global wireless power. This is from pyramidwirelesspower.com here. So the pyramid is called a gravity diode because it is precisely piezoelectrically tuned to the Earth's Schumann harmonic phase conjugate pump wave. And the ancients, they called it the hummer. It was called the hummer. Why is it humming? Because it's ringing with the Schumann infrasound. That's why it's humming. And the Schumann infrasound is a perfect phase conjugate pump wave, the same harmonics that allow your heart-brain to drive your DNA to bliss. It's the same frequencies. It's the same harmonics you feed a fire crystal to make gravity. It's the same frequencies. So anyway, the Schumann conjugate pump wave implodes in the pyramid dimensionally, and here's the frequencies by equation, here's the frequencies by measurement, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about the fire crystal. And so dimensionally, the pyramid, here's the slide showing the proof that longitudinal EMF is what gravity waves are made of by equation, Tom Bearden's book, Gravitobiology. Look, the same reason longitudinal waves make gravity is the same reason they make biology, because they make it centripetal, the essential electrical descriptor of all of life, all of consciousness, all of negentropy is specifically being electrically centripetal. So our new posters, Get Centripetal or Get Dead, will be available shortly. So basically what happens in the pyramid is the golden ratio, vertical height to diameter of base, entrains the Schumann harmonics to implode and dump out a longitudinal wave directionally at the bottom center called globalwirelesspower.com. Okay? And that global wireless power is the distribution into that array. Now, if you put some mercury in there in many pyramids, it actually functions like a lens to that longitudinal output. And those pyramids have to be at these sites and only these sites, the longitudinal array. Unfortunately, Tesla had the location of the nodes wrong and he had the frequency signatures wrong. He did a lot of work making longitudinals, but he actually didn't get the frequencies right because he didn't have PlanckFire.com. And he didn't get the placement right. When you see him trying to light the light bulbs on the lawn with a few million volts in the Tesla coil up the tower, he didn't pick the longitudinal nodes. And when he picked 60 cycle instead of 50 cycle for America, America will never have a carbon nano industry because carbon will not grow in 60 hertz in the factory. No, never. Whereas 50 hertz in Europe, exactly golden ratio to Planck, like 0.999%. 50 hertz is magic, the most commonly mentioned frequency for healing in all the cancer literature. Profoundly negentropic, profoundly carbon nano implosive. So if you want to make carbon grow like a flower called carbon nano, which will make every other energy and propulsion on this planet look like the Stone Ages for sure, okay? You want to make carbon grow like a flower, you got to get the hell out of America. I mean, out of 60 cycle. I'm not picking on anybody. I'm just saying, Tesla was a hero, all kinds of fabulous stuff, and Einstein was a hero. But being a hero, of course, they made some huge mistakes. And one of them was picking 60 cycle. Okay? I know because of my family business rewound every motor in the city of Buffalo when Tesla chose the frequency. Actually, I was there. Well, my family was there. So, point being that now we understand more about global wireless power being charge collapse perfected. We understand vacuum energy. So all vacuum energy exists. Every 0-point energy device, and there's a million of them, but ain't nobody teaching the principle behind it. Oops. The principle behind all zero-point vacuum energy devices is the same. It is the symmetry of recursive, fractal, implosive charge collapse. Absolutely. You do a frequency signature of Bearden's MEG, multi-energy device. There's a thousand. But if you know the principle, you can spectrum analyze and optimize. So until somebody teaches the principle behind all zero-point vacuum energy devices, let me give you an example. So we were in famous Joe Sell's living room in Lismore, Australia, who was powering his cars for years on implosive hydrogen energy. And by the way, so he's got these frequencies, right? He takes, it's like a concentric tubes of metal, and they happen to be fractal, implosive capacitively. And now that implosive capacitance drives the hydrogen out of water. And now that hydrogen powers the car, except, let me give you a real fun example. This is from Joe Sell personally, in his living room. He learned everything from God. He told me himself, or he told us, Valerie was there. He learned everything from God. And he's right. Intelligence of the plasma, God's not a bad name. It's okay if you understand what's behind it. Anyway, so then he says, oh yeah, I get my pipes going, I make this imploding fractal electric field, but then I have to condition the space. You know what happens when you set up a Therify? If you got natural materials in the room, eventually the electric field in the room is so implosive you don't need to turn it on. Actually, if it's natural enough space, it's true, actually. And that's called conditioning the space. You walk into your favorite sacred cathedral and your hair stands up because the space is conditioned. It's implosive. Well, so, Joe Sell's gadget wouldn't work right away. No, he had to first condition the space. And there's another little clue I will tell you that really, here is the, remember when Professor Ralph Otterpole is telling us that the railroad track will destroy, all the magnetic lines are dead, dead, dead. It's steel, man. That's the worst dielectric. If you want to kill the fairies and elementals, man, steel will do it first time. So anywho, Joe Sell kind of admits to us, he says, yeah, it's working pretty good, but when you drive over a railroad track.
Well, how does that work in a car then?
Yeah. Do you get it? It depends on the conditioned space, which means don't try to sustain bliss in a metal building in an ugly city because you will be imploding your environment and eating poison. Yeah. So this is the more fractal, the more implosive, the more centripetal the space. So we're finishing. So this was to be the outline of this talk. We talked about vacuum energy. We talked about the fact that golden ratio is a dominant geometry of orbital mechanics. It's simple that orbital mechanics is waves finding the way to be most constructive. We wrote the generalized wave equations, Navier-Stokes, etc., to prove that golden ratio is the generalized solution to all constructive wave interference. We published it. That's new information. This is no longer the perfection of art. No, it's also the perfection of all wave mechanics. Because if you solve the solution to constructive interference, you have solved the solution to compression. The solution to compression, called Alchemy, the solution to compression is the solution to almost every problem in our culture. Alchemy, urban design, computer design, sacred space, how to get through death. Every single one of these problems is the solution to compression. Literally, successful death is also an electrical black hole. So that's what we're saying here. Now that we understand that the waves had to make golden ratio to not just stabilize gravity, but stabilize all negentropy. So it's the electric reason for all action at a distance and longitudinal entanglement. We kind of talked about that. So I'm going to finish here. Now it's 4 o'clock. Yeah, yeah. But just to say, have we said enough about how to make this theory practical for you? Where the rubber hits the road on this theory is, now you know the physics behind. Are there some changes you might make in your life? Prioritizing sacred space, access to sacred sites, prioritizing bliss process, prioritizing environments where you're not poisoned all the time by your electrosmog. Because now you know the electrosmog is stealing the soul of your children. You have been told. There are no more excuses. Having kids all hours of the day with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in their ears is the same as destroying their soul. This is not subjective. This is measurable. They will not lucid dream. Not only do they lose attention span, they lose soul. So there's some practical applications here. Learning to have live food, learning the science of alchemy to alchemize. And as Roger was teaching at their seminar, the spagyric science of alchemy and how they potentize, even egg things and all of what this ancient alchemists do. The ancient alchemists were famous for eating their philosopher's stone. That's how the mad caliph went mad, actually. It was the Kaaba stone of the Muslims. And the Kaaba stone was a glass meteorite. And they ground it up, and that's how John Dee and Kelly made their alchemy. The purest gold ever measured in the history of the British Royal Society. John Dee and Kelly made, and you know how they did it? They ground up the Kaaba stone. How did it work? When a glass meteorite forms, the only metal that will survive the heat of re-entry is the platinum group metals, palladium, platinum, and gold. Now, when the palladium, platinum, gold is in a vapor state, making that glass meteorite like a sponge with little bubbles. And that will make what's called a superdielectric. A superdielectric, let me give you an example. When Scotty said, the dilithium crystals are going to blow up, okay? What he meant was our superdielectric fire crystal. We're going to talk about fire crystal in the next lecture. But that was a superdielectric. A superdielectric is what makes phase conjugate mirrors work, and it's how the Olmec used obsidian mirrors for ancestor phone calls. It's the same physics. So the obsidian, or the coating on the bottom of Nostradamus's scrying cup was a superdielectric, okay? Access to longitudinal coherence. So now I got this glass meteorite, and the mad caliph has just figured out that they can use it for gold making. And Peter the Hermit, who was the salesman who financed the first crusade, found out, they're making gold over there. But the mad caliph, meantime, was eating the philosopher's stone. But the reason they ate it, because immortality can result if you phase conjugate the blood. Actually, this was the myth of alchemy. And the immortality is specifically the sustainability of the implosion state, which makes you more negentropic. You literally get younger. If you know all the great alchemists of history, many of them the legend is they lived almost forever, you see. So the alchemy means that the implosion becomes sustainable. So anyway, many stories, but the point we were trying to make is that you can make practical decisions about the important things in life as you begin to understand more of this physics. That's the point. Yes. Yes?
Coherent longitudinal electric EMFs, they're called rainbow light, or the physics of the soul. Why is that dependent on the number of harmonics in the pine cone, or the number of dimensions?
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, yes. Why is it, since the coherent longitudinal is called the rainbow light body in Tibetan, what does that have to do with harmonic inclusiveness? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, the number of harmonics in the pine cone, or the number of dimensions you've lived in.
Yes. So essentially what happens is, when the Planck fire golden ratio phase conjugate harmonics look like a pine cone, you just saw that picture, okay, right? Now, the bigger that pine cone, the more golden ratio harmonics that are imploding. Now, the most valuable stargate in this galaxy, the reason the Orion Wars happened, the trapezium in Orion, is a cube. It's a phase conjugate cube. And because it's incredibly massive, that stargate, man, you can go a zillion galaxies in the other direction, no problem. You need really big guards at the door, that stargate. But the point is, that is harmonically inclusive. So the more the harmonics cascade, the more harmonic inclusive your brain waves and heart, the bigger the pine cone. And the bigger the pine cone, the more implosive the phase conjugation. And that means the stargate goes farther. It means the pine cone is more powerful. Harmonic inclusiveness does matter. And it's true, just to finish with this thought, since we need to make time for folks here. But when we say you went to the next dimension, the only thing it ever meant was you had some bliss, your DNA imploded, and your electric field got bigger because of the charge distribution of golden ratio. You look like a rose. Now, if the next harmonic past gamma shows up in your brain waves, the implosion gets more broad spectral, harmonic inclusive, and your aura gets even bigger. That's called going to the next dimension, where the next dimension is always and only and specifically the name for the next axis of spin symmetry which has been superposed. And you cannot superpose another axis of spin. For example, here's the cube, here's the dodeca. The dodeca is the next axis of spin for the cube, right? That's the next dimension. Dodeca is a 4D cube, literally. Now if I spin that spin and if I take that, ratchet it up a helix, and then braid that, I get the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th superposed spin axis. The next up to 12, actually. 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. So the superposed axes of spin, which define the next dimension, can never be added past 3 unless you use golden ratio, which is why that's the door to the next dimension. It's literally how your aura gets big. It's very simple. And you get more centripetal, and then you can throw your weight around. Okay. Was that a happily ever after? Any final question? Yeah. Yeah. The question is if we synthesized 50 hertz instead of the measured 53 hertz at those frequencies, would we get more healthy? A short answer would be the Earth has stabilized its implosion around 53 instead of 50 precisely because that is the exact ratio between 8.29 theoretical Schumann versus 7.29 versus 7.83. Same ratio as 50 to 53. So the Earth has stabilized its implosion along a slightly modified Planck fire. The thing is, if you try to make implosion with 50 hertz on the planet and everything around you is doing 53, it ain't going to go too far, actually. So that's why Patrick and I, when we measured this, and Patrick measured it, we changed the output of flame and sound, flame and mind to the 53 cascade instead of the 50 cascade. More people felt it, right, Patrick? It was definitely noticeably more effective.
And what was the 7.93?
See, 7.29 would be the theoretical Schumann, Planck times golden ratio, perfect. 7.9. Where 7.83 is the actual Schumann.
Yeah.
Hermes got it close, but not quite.
And then what's the 7.93?
No, it's not, wasn't mentioned here. Yeah, Earth. You're fighting the wave around you, kind of. Yeah. You could, yeah. We could tell Hermes to come back and fix the Earth too. You know, but the point is that tuning to charge collapse makes you centripetal and negentropic and self-organizing. That's the point here. Well, last question. Go ahead.
Some people after they have a near-death experience,
Yeah.
like clinical death, they develop ESP.
Yeah, near-death experience. Exactly. Yeah.
How can these ESP?
Yes. Well, I like Daniel Brinkley, who we knew some. So Daniel Brinkley had lightning death twice, right? After he died from lightning, when he came back from death, everybody he would touch, he would have such a flash of every peak of motion of their life that he was afraid to touch anybody. And we know exactly electrically why. You take high amperage through DNA helix at the moment of crystallization, it's a superconductor, man. The same thing as a thread of gold. Actually, you can make it a superconductor with a little amperage amp. So his DNA was literally an implosive superconductor. He literally inhabited lightning. Powder, you know the movie Powder? It's the same physics. So near-death experience, and that's why Every tradition on the planet, Templars, whatever, has a tradition for initiation by creating a near-death experience. It's literally the physics of teaching them longitudinal coherence, lucid dream, because you penetrate the still point. And on that note, thank you very much. We had some fun.